G'day 12, welcome back. This is lesson 2 on Buddhism. So today we're going to look at the nature and extent of adherence in the world. So that's this syllabus dot point here. Get that down in your book. When you see the word adherence, you might want to write above it, but that just means followers of the belief system and the sort of different types of believers that are about. So essentially what we're looking at is within Buddhism there are a few different strands or strains within Buddhism, like different angles or different takes on it, different perspectives. So we're going to analyse those today to build upon last lesson's understanding of Buddhism in general. So what I've got here is, if you can resist not going to slide 3 to cheat, it would be good if you could just try. These are all the same key terminologies from last lesson, but it'd be good if you could try to do a bit of revision with this, a bit of look, cover, write, check style stuff. So test yourself to see if you can remember what each of these terms mean. Once you've done that, have a quick look again here at slide 3, which gives you the answers for those key terminology there. Alright, so moving on, we'll get started with today. So get this heading down, or subheading, and copy this down into your book. So when we're looking at adherents of Buddhism, again we're looking at the followers or the different types of followers. So within Buddhism itself there are many different forms all across the world today. It's become globalized in some sense, in the way that a lot of the different strands have adapted better to different cultures than others. So for example, like Buddhism in Western culture is very different to Buddhism in Eastern culture, because we've adapted it to our to make it relevant, I suppose, in some aspects to our culture. When we're looking at the reason for this adaptability, it's different for each culture. One of the core things with Buddhism, as you saw from last lesson when we looked at, say, the Eightfold Path, a lot of those rules are pretty, not many people would disagree with them, even if you were, say, from another religion or belief system. A lot of those, things like being nice to people, only treating each other with respect, having the right thought, don't cheat on your partner, all those kind of things are kind of base morals that most people share. So being that that's the absolute core of Buddhism, and that's pretty much what it's about, it's really adaptable to most cultures around the world. It's one of the most, or if not the most, in my opinion, adaptable sort of belief system around the world. It can fit into almost any culture. But that being said, like any other belief system or religion, wherever it has appeared around the world, it has been adapted to the local beliefs and customs of the time. Okay, so I just wanted to pretext that a bit before we get into it. I do have a bit of another kind of disclaimer for the next slide. So there are two main forms of Buddhism. There's Theravada and Mahayana. Now, I just want to, before we start, because I'm going to talk about the two different strands, these two, and you may get confused because they are a bit different, these two. But what I want to point out is that Buddhism is unique, because each of these strands is still based off the same belief. So at the end of the day, Buddhists, they just follow the teachings of the Buddha. They just have different ways of going about it. I might even chuck that a bit below, so we'll look at that again. So there are two different strands. Copy this down. There are Theravada and Mahayana. Now, a good way to sort of distinguish what these two are about is that Theravada is the more traditional strand of Buddhism, and Mahayana is a more modern form. Now you'll notice the T starts on the same letter as traditional, and as M for modern. So that's a good way of sort of remembering it. They're both very popular adherents of Buddhism. So we'll start with Theravada. So this is sort of the where Buddhism kind of started in terms of its true essence and strictness in its beliefs. So Theravada means teaching of elders. So this strand is mostly practiced in Southern Asia, So in countries like Sri Lanka, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, and parts of India as well. This one is really concerned about meditation and focusing on Buddha's teaching very strictly and very literally, according to the Eightfold Path to Enlightenment, or Nirvana, which we looked at last lesson. So they're all about, similar to how Buddha attained enlightenment through meditation. That's their main focus of what they're all trying to do as well. They're really focused on becoming what they call arhat, or fully awakened beings. So basically that means you, similar to Buddha, you're going to try and meditate for about 49 days straight. Now, not many, even if you are a monk, that can be very difficult to do. So it's sort of a hard thing that is required, and it does require a lot of dedication, as we said there, but it's usually only attempted by monks or nuns, not normal followers. So let's say for example, I might just cover that quickly. So you can be a follower of Buddhism, but not be a monk or a nun, if that makes sense. So like you don't have to become fully indoctrinated into it to be able to follow its beliefs and principles. If you do, though, there are more expectations of you as you're representing the Buddhist faith, if that makes sense. So in that way, the role of what they call lay people, which are followers or ordinary folk, so anyone who's not a monk or a nun, essentially, is considered a lay person. That's just the term they use. You're subsidiary, okay? So you're mainly there to support the monks and nuns to bring good karma to themselves and to the world through their deeds, okay? It's not so much focused about you achieving enlightenment. It's by them achieving enlightenment, the world's becoming a better place, if that makes sort of sense. So they're very big, again, on individual attainment of enlightenment. They're still like, they're not like bastards that don't want to help anyone, but they're very much concerned about their own enlightenment and focusing on that as their primary focus. Whereas if we look at, so that's Theravada. If we look at Mahayana, that's the different strand there. So this one means great vehicle. This one's all about focusing on the group, or even forsaking enlightenment, so you as a believer can try and get as many other people to that concept of enlightenment before you yourself become enlightened and then disappear from the world, kind of thing. This one's mainly practiced in Nepal, Japan, China, Tibet and Korea, so that northern part of Asia. I might even just write that in brackets there. If I can spell it right. This one's aimed at incorporating a lot of more newer teachings into the practice. They're a lot more open-minded in terms of their approach. So let's say, for example, Theravada Buddhism can be really strict on the rules of Buddhism itself, and very strict on enlightenment can only be attained by meditating a certain way at a certain time and things like that. So Mahayana is a bit more open in terms of how they do that. For that reason, Mahayana is the more popular strand that's considered to be getting around the globe or becoming a globalized force a lot quicker than the other ones. Another main and huge difference with Mahayana compared to Theravada is that for lay people, so lay people in traditional Theravada Buddhism can't achieve enlightenment. You have to become a monk and choose that pathway, whereas here they're saying you don't have to be, you can be a lay person and still reach enlightenment. So that's a huge difference in terms, or core belief difference between the two. They have a less emphasis on individualism, and they're more focused on encouraging everyone towards an enlightenment path or journey. So that's what they call bodhisattva. So that word literally means enlightenment through like teaching other people, sort of thing. So if you're living your life as best you can according to the principles of Buddhism and encouraging others and things like that to achieve it, then that's considered a noble and righteous path in Mahayana Buddhism. Okay, you're striving for enlightenment, and that's the best sort of possible direction you can go under. They use a lot of chanting of mantras and sutras. Basically, they're like Buddhist scriptures or Buddhist parables and things like that. So it sucks that we didn't get to go, but the Buddhist temple we were going to visit is a Mahayana Buddhist temple, and it's run by nuns. And they do a lot of chanting of mantras and sutras, and we were going to do it too, but sadly, thanks to the Rona, we won't be able to do that. And like I said before, this one's more popular form of Buddhism because its teachings are a bit less rigid and a bit less strict. Not that I'm not saying that their core beliefs change, but in terms of how it can be interpreted through different cultures, it's a lot more adaptable than Theravada Buddhism is. Again, a little disclaimer here. So while they both have different approaches to Buddhism between the two strands, they both follow the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. They're the core teachings of the Buddha, and they remain at the core, whether you're Theravada or Mahayana. It doesn't matter. They're just different. They can coexist harmoniously within each other. It's just a different way to approach it. So that's the sort of two main streams. There is a third one that's quite popular as well, which I want to touch base on, and that's Tibetan Buddhism, or Vajrayana, but you can just refer to it as Tibetan because that's the more popular term for it. So the current Dalai Lama is a Tibetan Buddhist. The teachings of this one is based around Hindu and Hinduism traditions. Now remember that a lot of the elements of Buddhism have their roots in Hinduism in India, because if we remember back, Buddha was born in Nepal, India. So there was a strong element, and those elements of asceticism, or those elements of leaving behind worldly possessions, a lot of that comes from Hinduism. Tibetan Buddhism is a more spiritual version of Buddhism. There are many different types of gods and personifications of Buddha. So, for example, the Dalai Lama is considered a reincarnation of the first Buddha, and that when he dies, he's reborn again through another person. So his spirit sort of lives on throughout different people. So it's much more spiritual and sort of, I guess, less pragmatic than the other forms of Buddhism. So its emphasis on the concept of karma is I'm not saying the others don't believe in it, but they have a greater emphasis on it because they believe everything is connected via the universe. So that concept of karma, what goes around comes around, good things happen. If you do good things happen to you, bad things happen to you, sort of thing, is a very important belief and striving for them. And that's sort of part of the reason why they would be so nice and kind to people. They're also really big into samsara, which is that cycle of birth and rebirth, so dying and becoming reborn, and reincarnation. So they're really big on that. If you, for example, have really bad karma in your lifetime, the sort of, again, because it's more spiritual, they have this sort of emphasis, not that they have a heaven and hell type thing. So say Theravada and Mahayana have no concept of heaven or hell or things like that, whereas Tibetan have this kind of idea that if you have bad karma throughout your life, you're going to be reborn as something really low or something really unfortunate, or if you've been so bad, your soul will get stuck in that cycle of samsara and you'll never be reborn again because of your ignorance. So that's an interesting little kind of take on it. They also they believe in nirvana. That idea of enlightenment is the end goal, and they believe it through that bodhisattva path, which is that path of through helping others that you'll become enlightened. And the last point here, just to emphasize that bit of bodhisattva, so helping people become enlightened, is your way of getting enlightenment. They sort of say that the ultimate gesture of compassion is that, say you're to reach a point where you've become enlightened, but you, rather than being rebirthed and reborn again, you choose not to enter nirvana or the sort of heaven enlightenment style, but you return back to the world with the objective of helping others gain their enlightenment too. So you can sort of see through those ideas that Tibetan Buddhism is a bit more spiritual, and you can almost see that that's the idea that the concept of the Dalai Lama takes forward, of the Buddha being reincarnated to help as many people become enlightened as possible. Just check how much time I have here. So yeah, again, disclaimer, they're not against each other, any form of Buddhism. They're just different in sort of their practices. They all have the core same beliefs. This is just a photo I took, because you guys can't go to the temple. This is one I took last year that I thought you might, I don't know, like to see. It's a cool place. So again, this idea of bodhisattva, a person who is able to reach enlightenment, but they delay doing so through compassionate for suffering beings. So that idea that your path to enlightenment is through that concept of helping others through their sort of suffering so that they can become enlightened. What I want you guys to do when you've done that is, I've just got some revision kind of questions, 1, 2 and 3. I want you to copy them down and answer them in your books, or you can answer them full sentence. Might be a way to go. And once you've done that, have another sort of recap of that story of the Buddha here. Maybe even go back up here and check your key terminology again. But that's sort of it for the week. Once you have done, I'll explain this in the Google Classroom post as well, but just take a photo of your book showing me you've got these notes down, and that'll then get my okay. If you do have any questions about anything, please make sure you email me and contact me. Don't forget to keep working on your PIP as well, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.